I am so excited to be here with my friend Noah to discuss her book, Israel, a simple guide to the most misunderstood country on earth. And I asked Noah to speak with me today, not only because she's a dear friend of mine, and I think this book is truly fantastic, but also because it is the model for everything that I'm trying to achieve myself, which is inform, simplify, and entertain. And she's a huge inspiration to me. And in my mind, the epitome of smart is sexy. So
Woohoo!
welcome, Noah.
Smart and sexy is the new smart.
I think so. I really do. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun. Like literally, we've known each other for like 1,000 years.
Right? And I mean,
1,000.
Forever. Can you tell everyone a little bit about, who you are? Because you have a storied career since long before you became a best-selling author.
Yeah, thank you. So I was born and raised in Israel. I started my career in the entertainment industry when I was like a kid, like somebody else that I know right here, which is why we're introduced to begin with. I started acting when I was about 14 professionally, got my first scholarship, a drama scholarship at 14, started producing when I was 16 and became just very active in the Israeli entertainment industry. Then I moved to the States and I was the first to bring the Israeli television format to the US with a show called In Treatment on HBO. And it basically created the Israeli format sale market in the US, which a lot of these amazing shows that you all know followed, like Homeland and Euphoria and Beauty and the Baker, and like all these television shows that originated in Israel. So I've been in the entertainment industry my whole life, and storytelling has been what I have always been drawn to. And in the past like decade or so, I've been very active in trying to explain Israel to people, because I realized that Israel generates a lot of like passion, a lot of like anger, and a lot of love, and a lot of this, and a lot of disinformation. And people have like all like they don't have the facts, but they have a lot of opinions, like a lot of opinions. And I realized that I was asked for many, many years, like, is there a book that I can read that isn't like a 6,000 page history book? I kept looking for that book and I couldn't find it. So at some point I'm like, you know what? F that. I'm just going to write it.
Yeah, I think you really succeeded, because in a topic that is so emotionally charged, you just kind of laid out facts, which is so refreshing. But then you did have the emotional side where you put it into context of your own experience growing up, and so I loved that.
Thank
And I
you.
do have to say, the book has been praised by people from Bill Maher to Ben Shapiro, which is super random.
It's a range.
I mean, in today's political environment, I mean, that in of itself is an achievement. So
Thank
congrats.
you. I just have the most amazing group of people that have read the book and put their names publicly and were like, no, this is good.
Yeah,
So, don't take my word for it or your word for it. Just take Aaron Sorkin's word for it. How about that?
exactly. I'll take Aaron Sorkin's word on anything. He has the
Me
best.
too.
So there's so much to unpack in this book. And when I was thinking through how I wanted to do this interview, I love the history and I love politics, as everyone watching already knows, but I really want to urge everyone watching to actually get the book and read the history for themselves. We don't have to do a whole like run through of all of that. Instead, I want to do something a little bit different, and I hope you're up for it.
I'm sure I am.
You proudly say that you can break down any argument that anybody has against Israel.
Yeah.
So I want to put you to the challenge.
Great.
Okay, so I'm going to play a few characters.
Great.
So we're having a conversation. We're chatting at some sushi restaurant in LA. And so the Jews stole the land.
Okay. Yeah. That particular piece of land in the last 2,500 years have been a lot of things, but it's only been one sovereign state owned by one people, and those are the Jews. And that is corroborated not just by the Bible, whether you believe it or not. I'm very respectful. I'm not a religious person, but I'm very respectful to religion. So it's the Bible if you believe in the Bible. It's also historical writing of the era. It's also archaeological finding of the time. So there's no question that the Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel, period, end of story. And the Jews came back to Israel in the beginning of the 19th century because they were pushed out of everywhere else they were living in. So this wasn't a colonialist endeavor. This wasn't anything. There was not even a state. Palestine is a regional, it's referred to a geographical region. It was an underdeveloped peripheral region of the Ottoman Empire and then the British Empire, which was kind of like the land cost about 2.5 shekels. Nobody wanted to go there. So the Jews started trickling down because of pogroms and because of like the Holocaust, and had nowhere else to go. And they were like, well, we better go back to our homeland if we ever want to be, safe again.
Okay, fine. But Noah, see, I don't know if I'm like really want to go to Israel because like, isn't it a super religious country?
Oh my God, that's one of my favorites. So, by the way, this is a common mistake. So, a lot of younger people in America think that they put Israel in the like research between like Saudi Arabia and Iran, where Israel is literally the only country in the Middle East in which you can practice any religion freely. It protects all religions in the world, like literally every single one of them, all of them. And it's the only country in the Middle East in which you literally can make out with your same-sex partner on the beach and nobody would blink an eye. There are 14% of Israeli population that defines themselves as ultra-Orthodox, which are indeed very religious. All the rest are very, like, they range from like secular to traditional or whatever. And it's like, in terms of like LGBTQ plus rights, like the minister of the police, who's very right wing, is gay and married to a guy and they have a family. And nobody blinks an eye. Like there was never a don't ask, don't tell policy in the Israeli military. Like it's so much more tolerant that even America, let alone the region that it's at. So like, no, it's not a religious country. It's a culturally Jewish yet not exclusively Jewish secular state.
Are you sure it's secular though? Because isn't it like an all Jewish government?
No, it's not. The third largest party in Israeli elections up until like, well, the recent election are the Arab parties. Like the Arab party right now in Israel, which Arabs are 21% of the Israeli population, right? Arab Israelis, Palestinians. So the Arab party is the one that decided on whether or not to allow a government to be formed. Like they have political power, they have equal rights. There's like Israeli Supreme Court judge who's an Arab sentenced the former president of Israel to jail. Like no.
Okay, well, next point is there is an Israeli occupation happening right now.
Okay, so here's the thing. The state of Israel, the green line of the state of Israel, has equal rights for Arabs and Jews and everybody else. There are two particular like autonomouses within the country. One of them is Gaza, which is actually controlled by Hamas, which is in the south of Israel. The other one is the West Bank. The West Bank is an unideal like reality right now. It's a military control. Like that piece of land was occupied by Israel in 1967 when the entire countries of the entire region started a war to destroy Israel. So they all invaded from all areas. Just remember, Israel is one country the size of New Jersey with 9 million people at the moment. There are 21 Arab and like enemy countries around it that have been kind of conspiring to decimate it and this time or another throughout history. So in 1967 they took over these lands. These lands were intended to be Palestine. The question as to why they're not Palestine are a question that needs to be asked, and it's actually asked in the book. So there's a lot of blame to go around, and nobody thinks that the situation is ideal right now. But why is there no Palestine is something that needs to be discussed.
But at the end of the day, no matter what you say, Israel's just not interested in peace. I think their interest is just to control Palestine and the Palestinian people.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you look down in actual facts and history, and I run through this in chapter 7, which is called the tug of war and peace. I literally run down in every single peace offering that was offered to the Palestinians by Israel from 1922 onwards. And the fact of the matter is there's been a refusal up until now on the other side. And as a liberal, you have to kind of think, what do you want? Like, do you want a state or do you want the entire state? And if you want the entire state, you're going to have a problem. But if you want a state, let's start talking about borders. Let's start talking about jurisdiction. Let's start talking about values and governance system. And let's talk about like not, giving power to Hamas, which is a terrorist organization that wants to enact Sharia law all over the region. Right. So let's talk about these things and then actually, figure out a solution. But when you go down the history, and you see how many times Israel actually attempted to make peace, including giving upwards of 90% of everything the Palestinians were asking for, including neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, including all these sticking points. And the Palestinians kept saying no. The leadership, okay? They kept saying no.
So, okay, I'm going to go back to Natalia now. That was fun.
Yeah.
And you touched on something that I actually really wanted you to elaborate on, which is Hamas. Can
Yeah.
you just kind of explain? I think a lot of people are confused when they think of the Palestinian government as like one entity. Can you actually explain the difference between the PLO and Hamas, because they are very different?
Very different. So Hamas is a terrorist organization that aims to enact Sharia law all over the region. Sharia law, just in case we're not clear, is non-conducive for human development. Like it's a violent, oppressive for women, oppressive for LGBTQ rights. It's like the definition of a political like rape culture. Basically, it allows a man to beat up his wife. It's a horrific way of living. Hamas is an organization that is committed to destroying Israel. This is not, I'm not making this up. You can go ahead and Google the Hamas charter, and you will see it written black on white. Their intention is to destroy Israel. They're sponsored by Iran, who's also intending on destroying Israel, and they just narrowly won the elections in the 2006 and took over Gaza by force. And by force, I mean they actually, so the Palestinian Authority is an entity that was formed in order to start negotiating with Israel and hopefully create the Palestinian state around. They're more moderate. They're the ones who are trying to find kind of like a resolution and a solution. The Hamas took over Gaza by force. And by force, I mean they took over Gaza, killing Palestinian Authority officials, throwing them off the rooftops, dragging them behind cars, viciously, like a military coup, took over Gaza. And they are the ones that are now controlling Gaza. So when there's effectively a war between Gaza, who's controlled by a terrorist organization, and Hamas is designated terrorist organization by every Western country that we know, right? And Israel, the single consistent democracy in the Middle East. So when people say free Gaza, what they need to say is free Gaza from Hamas. That's what they need to say.
And I think that's an incredibly important distinction to be
Yeah.
made. We all want equality for people, and citizens at the end of the day are the ones who are suffering the most.
Absolutely. The Palestinian people are the one that are paying the worst price for this. The Palestinian people in Gaza, they are under siege. They are under siege by an Islamist terrorist organization that is oppressive and wants to enact Sharia law. This is horrible. It's horrible.
Well, to end on a slightly more positive note, because there is so many beautiful and fun elements to Israel that I think that so many people miss. And I know the times I've gone, I've just had the best time ever. And
Yeah, it's, you know what? Here's the thing. I've never met anybody who went to Israel and came back and was like,
yeah, totally.
all right,
Jewish, I mean, and like from anywhere,
Jewish, not Jewish, whatever.
everybody loves it. One of the really cool aspects of Israel, and you talk about it a bit when you tell your grandmother's story, is this kind of concept of kibbutz.
Yeah.
So can you tell everyone what a kibbutz is? Because I think it's so dope.
It is dope. It was so
Yeah,
radical at the time. It was like
yeah.
amazing. So a kibbutz was formed. The concept of a kibbutz, it was started out in 1910 from in the kibbutz that my grandmother founded. She joined in. It was called Ganya, and it's basically a group of young. Just imagine like a group of like early 20s, teens to early 20s, coming from Europe, going like, all right, how do we like kind of go into this barren land and like work the ground? We can't do it alone. Let's form these units. So it's essentially a commune, right? It's essentially a commune in which everybody owns everything, everybody gets paid everything, everybody contributes to everything, and you live a communal living. At the time, they had like joint kids room with all the kids were like raised together, and they had like there's a joint dining table, and it was obviously for today adjusted. It's not for everyone, right? Like I wouldn't be able to live in one now, but I
Right.
grew up in my grandmother's kibbutz, and it's such freedom and such support system and so much fun. And at the time they were like wild and radical, like socialist and radical and free. And when you just kind of imagine these young people like your age, right? Like leaving cold Europe and being like, let's put shorts on and start working the land and sleep in tents. I mean, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible.
It really is.
And I think that something in the kibbutz is actually something to teach us for like how we live. It's the power of community.
I'm really drawn to so many of these ideas because not just in the time of COVID, but even before, inequality is like soaring, and the capitalist model that we've kind of created over the last 100 years is in a lot of areas it's
Very
false.
problematic.
Yeah, and you said you wouldn't want to necessarily live that extreme, and I don't think I would fare very well either, but there are things that we can learn and take from it, in terms of living sustainably, and
Absolutely.
not relying on like big corporations to feed us, relying on your community more and growing your own
Yeah.
food.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's really, really cool, and I love that you talked a bit about that. So before we go, is there anything that else that I have, that you kind of want to touch on that I maybe miss?
I think also what like interesting in this book is I talk about possibility in the future rather than I kind of lay out the facts. I talk about my family. I talk about myself. I make it as like fun and relatable. And then I talk about the good shit that Israel brings to the world. And that is something that when I went through this, even I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. So a lot of people know about like the tech and startup industry, but like there's so many more areas in which Israel contributes to the world, from charity to like treating the Syrian refugees, like hundreds of thousands of wounded in the border in the civil war in Syria, to like helping all over the world and sending aid all over the world, and like know-how and knowledge and like trauma and like emotional trauma and like sexual trauma for the Yazidi people, like training Yazidi women that have been captured by ISIS and then sending them back to Iraq with all this like knowledge of how to overcome emotional trauma, to like food in the world right now, like Israeli food and Israeli fashion and Israeli inventions that you don't even know. Like if you like cherry tomatoes, like the little cherry tomatoes, that's an Israeli invention. So
Yeah.
all these things that Israel had contributed to the world in the 73 years of its existence, I think are extraordinarily inspiring, and it's important for people to know this, especially if you're interested in like the world at large.
One thing that was especially touching, and I hear about these things all the time, is the story that you tell of the Syrian refugee that was treated by Israeli doctors, and he
Not that was. There were hundreds of thousands of them.
yes, but you specifically tell, there was one character that you talk about, and he is kind of personifies a whole group of people who are raised believing that Israel wants to destroy them, that they are the devil or whatever it may be. And then they meet these people and they're just so not what they've been brought up learning.
Yeah. But
Exactly.
yeah, that particular person who was being interviewed was a refugee on the island of Lesbos, and he was Syrian, and he gave an interview, couldn't use his name because that's how it goes, and just described the vicious anti-Israel and anti-Semitic propaganda that they teach in schools in the Arab world about Israel. And then he shows up like being like pulled out of the water in a refugee boat, pulled out of the water by a group of people wearing a Star of David. And at first he's scared. He's like, oh my God, it's the Zionist enemy. And then he realized, no, they're treating me and they're built a school for me. And this is not at all what I was told. And we need more of that.
Yeah.
More collaboration, more cooperation, more people knowing each other, more of that,
Yeah. I
not
have
less.
goosebumps.
Me too.
Well, you are what the work that you've done is a big step in that direction. So I want to thank you so much for not only taking the time with me, but for writing this book, because the world needs it. And I
Pleasure.
really urge all of you guys to read it. It's so much fun. I read it in like 2 days.
Yay! That was the intention.
Yeah, yeah,
That was literally the intention. I'm like, no, this needs to be quick. This needs to
yeah.
read quick. Like I've been,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, and actually, speaking of quick, I just have to commend you on, at the very end, you basically do this like like an appendix, and you're like, just in case you need these little bullet points in your arguments, like let me just lay it all out for you. It's
Oh
really
my God, I'm so happy you picked up on it. I'm literally like, I'm gonna put at the end of the book 3 pages of the book in which you can rip them up,
yeah,
put them in your pocket, and just have an answer for everything.
it's
Just
brilliant.
sum it up in bullet points.
It's like, no, you don't have to just be like, let me find it. It's like, no, I have the point right here. So
Yeah.
thank you. Just, you're amazing. I hope that I can see you soon. And it's been so much fun. And seriously, I love the book.
Thank you so much. Yay, I'm so happy.
Yeah.
So good to see you.
I know. Okay, we'll speak soon.
Yeah. Bye, love.
Thank you.